We recording?
Not yet. It's still getting there. Now we are.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is the April 11th CVTA Technical Advisory Committee meeting. And we will start with roll call and certification of a quorum. You're muted, Janice.
Sorry, give me 1 second. I had a couple more people come in. There we go. Town of Ashland, Miss Amos.
Here.
Charles City County, Miss Russell. Chesterfield, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Mitchell. Chesterfield County, Miss Smith.
Here.
Miss Walker.
Here.
Franklin County, Mr. Coleman. Mr. Goins.
Here.
Hanover County, Mr. Badunez. Mr. Flagg.
Here.
Henrico County, thank you. Henrico County Chair Yor.
Here.
Miss Smidler.
Here.
Kent County, Mr. Stodder. Miss Leduc. Powhatan County, Mr. Shardine.
Here.
City of Richmond, Miss Clark.
Here.
Bridewell. DRPT, Mr. Brule. Mr. Binsky. DDOT, Mr. Mann. Mr. Riblett. Virginia Port Authority, Miss Nelson.
Here.
GRTC, Miss Torres. Miss Sink. RMTA, Miss Dean.
Here.
Thank you. Plan RBA, Mr. Parsons.
Here.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for attendance.
Thank you, Janice. All right, next item would be consideration of amendments to the agenda. Chet, any changes to the agenda?
No, sir, none to make today.
Okay, very good. Next item would be approval of the March 14th TAC meeting minutes, which are included on page 3 of the agenda. And that is action that is requested. So everybody has a chance to review. We can entertain a motion.
I move approval of the minutes.
Thank you, Nora. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Austin. All right, so we have a motion, a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, everybody in favor, please say aye.
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 All right, any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Next item would be public comment. Do we have anybody registered for public comment?
No, we don't have anyone registered. There are a few people listed as attendees, but it's staff and support. So at this point, we don't have anyone wishing to participate. We do have a Q&A function at the bottom for anyone who wants to submit questions during the meeting. We'd ask you please use that function.
Very good, and we'll keep an eye on that in case anybody puts anything in Q&A. Next item would be the CVTA TAC Chairman's report. I have nothing to report outside of the agenda today, so we can move on to the TAC staff update. Chet.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. TAC staff update. I had Finance Committee on here, but the Finance Committee meets Wednesday. So a lot of the work that we're doing today will lead into the main discussion for Finance Committee, which is regional funding scenarios. We are kind of slotted in over the next few weeks to get a lot of things done as long as we can hit our marks. So today's meeting kind of sets that in motion, leading into the Finance Committee on Wednesday, and then public review for public hearing on the 29th when the authority next meets. So I don't have any other updates for Finance Committee at this point.
Okay, is that the only item you need to cover on your
Yes.
staff update? All right.
Yes, sir, that's it.
Great. Next item, B6 on page 2, innovation funding, 288 northbound hard shoulder running lanes project. Chet, you want to bring the group up to speed on that? And I don't, unless somebody from VDOT has joined us, I guess you have to cover the project scope is needed.
Sure. Yeah, the authority has asked that that TAC take a look at this project. In the past few weeks, there was some information made available that an amount of money in innovation funding, a specialized project funding source, was available from VDOT to apply specifically to this project, the northbound hard shoulder running lane. And VDOT was hoping to apply that funding to this project if CVTA could help meet the gap to bring this to a competitive level for smart scale, which means bring the total cost into the $10 to $15 million range. The amount that was requested or the amount that was discussed, it wasn't an official request, was $8 million from CVTA to bring that project into that competitive range. And if that was possible, then VDOT was comfortable with the ability for this project to compete and to secure smart scale funds. The authority was not in a position to take action without the advice of TAC at their meeting on the 25th, and has asked that TAC come back with a recommendation on whether to support that commitment or to go in another direction. We have been told that if this project is not supported, then the innovation funding will go to Northern Virginia for a similar hard shoulder running project in that region. So I think the option is we find a way to support this singular project to receive this additional funding, or we say thank you and lose the opportunity to a different region. So that's kind of setting the stage for the discussion today. Staff's certainly willing to give our opinion, but really wanted to leave it to the TAC to kind of discuss a little bit, since it hasn't been on the agenda previous to this point.
And before we turn it over to questions, just clarification, this particular project was previously submitted by Plan RVA for smart scale consideration, but was not funded.
That's correct. This project, as we've discussed over the last few weeks, there was kind of a revelation that Plan RVA was able to submit smart scale applications as well, 5 applications for pre-app. And this project was identified as one of those 5 applications. It wasn't on the original list for the TPO to submit. It got pushed off to that second level of projects, and it was one that was on the 5 pre-apps that Plan RVA did vote to support, and staff was helping to submit those applications.
And it was submitted for previous round of smart scale by I guess TPO.
I believe so. Yes, we can verify that.
I think it was round 3 maybe, and
Okay.
then this round it was not submitted by any localities for CVTA regional funding this round, or this first round we're doing now, but several other sections of hard surface paving on the shoulders for other segments for 288 were submitted.
That's correct. And Miles is joining us too. You are correct that it was submitted. This project specifically was submitted in a previous round. And I believe the southbound 288 hard shoulder running project was submitted this round.
Gotcha. All right, I'll open this up to questions and discussion. Barb.
So it looks to me that it was submitted for regional funding. No? 288 northbound hard shoulder running, Powhatan, Goochland, and it's 23 million. Or anyway, where is it and how much is it?
And Mr. Chair, I was gonna kind of piggyback off of that. I know in the TAC package, it talked about this 8 million being funded, and I was trying to identify it as well on the funding scenario plan.
Got you. Chad or Miles, can y'all?
Okay, I think I'm following now that Dorona said that. So it is in there in the funding scenarios, but it's in there only because of this opportunity with innovation funding. No one submitted it. You just added it in. Is that right?
Hey, this is Miles jumping in. Yes, there was no application for this particular project. Because of this opportunity, we went ahead and included it in the draft scenarios, just so that it would be there for the discussion purposes.
Okay, so what we're considering is investing $8 million to get 16 million in innovation money.
Right, I believe, Chet, correct me if I'm wrong, it's 6 million in the innovation, and then the rest would go through the smart scale process. So it would essentially be our 8 million plus the state's 6 million and then go into smart scale.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, thanks, Miles. And I think for reference, if you look at the scoring sheets that were in the packet today, the 4 different scoring sheets by category, the northbound 288 hard shoulder running is not in there. The southbound is. There is a northbound no, I'm sorry, it's not in there.
It's not in what?
The scoring sheets, so it wasn't in the applications that were scored.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Because, go ahead, Dorana.
Yeah. Oh, I was just gonna ask, so, and this would be the locality, so Goochland put in an application for the southbound. And
That's correct.
This request is for the northbound. And I know one of the things that I had the question about was funding, which the Act says itself, the CVTA Act says that a project must go through an objective process, which we have in order to receive the funding. So my question would be, how will we meet that burden of that? And I know I thought I suggested that it be combined with the southbound in order to have it gone through or go through the scoring prioritization process. But it looks like you just totally left them as 2 separate projects, correct?
And Brett Powhatan here. When I spoke with Mr. Mann at VDOT about this project, I had that same question of why not do both north and south? And his thought was, I don't know if he's on here, but might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but the north side was, I think, the more affordable of the 2. I think the south side one was a bit more. So their thought was we could realistically get this half done, but if we try to take them both on as one project, it might be too large of a dollar value to do well in smart scale without a significant larger match to go with it. But if this one is funded and does well, then to look at pursuing the southbound separately. I think that was how he had summarized it.
Yeah, this is Austin with Goochland. Shane told me the same thing, that the southbound is about $37 or so million, looking at the scoring sheet. And then the northbound is 23, 25. So it's significantly cheaper. And I think if he told me correctly, it's cheaper and also has a better benefit. So the score would be higher if it were on the sheet, I think is what he was getting at.
And Mr. Chair, I have one last follow-up to that.
Yes, ma'am.
So, and also asking the recommendation for combining, I asked, was there an ability to replace, so switch out? Is that something that Goochland was interested in?
I don't know if, I guess, are you getting at replacing the southbound with the northbound? Is that what you're,
Yes.
or vice versa? I think because the northbound is going to be cheaper, and I think they picked that one. I don't know if they would be willing to apply that same funding for the southbound versus, I think they might just ship it up to Nova if we were to say we'd rather have it on the southbound because of the cost difference.
Oh, no, not that, sir. What I'm asking is for the CVTA regional funding project, would you want to switch? And so what would be scored and ranked or replaced as your submittal would be the north versus the south that was submitted?
Yeah, I don't know offhand. I'd have to talk with Tom and with our staff too to see if that's something that we want to talk about doing potentially.
So Chet and Miles, Verona brought up a good point. Because of the requirements of the CVTA regional funding has to be basically evaluated through a cost benefit analysis. Because this was not submitted as an application for screening, you'll need to go back and run this through the scoring model, correct?
Well, yes, I mean, there's the entire process that was set up in the framework for project application and eligibility screening and scoring, and this project was not part of any of that. So I think from a staff side, thinking about the future, I'd be concerned about setting a precedent for later replacement of projects when it didn't fit into the framework. I certainly understand if there's free money involved. So I think on our side, we can certainly look into the ability of the authority to make a decision at the last minute to replace a project if a condition like this applies. But we haven't done it before. So I think that's a question that could be asked.
All right, Joe, and then Barb.
Thank you. And I'm still looking forward to hearing more discussion on this, but a couple points. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the first 2 years of smart scale funding, did those projects, Fall Line Trail plus the other 4, did they go through this objective ranking and scoring process? As a question, I can't recall if they did or didn't. And second, I would just suggest that we need to keep in mind, and well, we don't need to. We recognize here in Hanover that sometimes things happen that don't fit perfectly into our schedules and our processes, but in order to take advantage, sometimes you have to go outside of what is the normal framework that you would usually follow in order to maximize potential opportunities. That's really the question that I think we're faced with. But I would like a response to the first question I asked about the initial 2-year set of projects.
Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to answer that.
Yes, Jeff.
The authority did not follow that process because it wasn't established at the time, and made the decision to support the fall line as its regional priority, and then to make sure that all 9 jurisdictions receive benefit at the same time. So the December commitment was outside of the established framework.
And just to clarify, I wasn't accusing staff or anybody else of circumventing. I just wanted to make that point. That's what I recalled. I couldn't recall exactly the time frame of that decision versus the framework, but I was pretty certain that they hadn't gone through the vetting process that we are currently applying to this next set.
Okay.
And the law still, I mean, regardless, if I just might add, I mean, the law has been the law, so nothing has changed there. We just didn't have the framework in place. So we didn't technically follow. I'm going to backtrack and say we're not going to say we didn't follow the law, but it's been stated. Okay, what has transpired? I'll let others make that assessment.
So valid point, Joe, and I think you might have just created more work for Chet and Miles, but keep in mind that the allocation for at least the fall line out of the first 2 years of funding was a general allocation to the trail as a whole. So I assume we'll probably need to do a cost benefit analysis for any of the various sections before money's appropriate or allocated to those phases so that we do comply with the law. That was sort of posed as a question, but maybe it's more of a statement. Chet, you were shaking your head. Do you?
Yes, I think that would be a prudent direction to go as the next steps of the fall line are taken.
Okay, not to get off topic. So, Joe, do you have any more follow-up? All right, Barb, then Chessa, then Nora, then Diana.
I was going to let other folks go. If they don't cover it, I'll ask my question later.
All right, Chessa, you're up. See if you can read Barb's mind.
Good luck. No. I was just going to bring up, there was discussion about Goochland maybe swapping out their app. Just a note that Goochland gets 4 applications per the framework, and it doesn't look like they used all 4. I don't know if that's helpful to the conversation. So we could just, if we all agree, it's, out of the process a little bit or after the fact, but it doesn't look like they submitted all 4. Maybe it's just an ad if everyone agrees. I don't know. Just throwing that out.
Good suggestion, Chessa. Nora.
I had a 2-part. The first part was the same thing Chessa just said. So the other thing is, are there any other financial commitments on the project currently?
Chet, you want to field that one?
Sorry, what was the question?
Any other financial commitments for this particular project?
I don't believe so.
It's my understanding that it would be a financial commitment from the commissioner for the innovative funding, provided CVTA agrees to fund the up to 8 million that was requested from this group, and then it would go in as a smart scale with application with the leverage funding between both CVTA regional and innovative funding of whatever that total amount was. Is that the way you understood it, Chet and Austin?
Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't know to restate it. Yes, that's our understanding. 3 different sources.
So basically, it would be submitted as a leverage project with no guarantee that it would be funded through Smart Scale, but VDOT indicated they had done the math and felt that this was the amount of funding that would need to be leveraged, but in total to have it score well in Smart Scale, considering it had been previously submitted with no leverage funding. So they knew how it scored several rounds ago.
That's how Shane kind of relayed it to me. So that's my understanding as well.
Thank you. Nora, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
All right, Darana and then Barb. So I guess, Chessa, you did not read Barb's mind all the way.
Thanks. A couple of things. I'll start out with the latter that Todd just said about the leveraging projects. I want to say we had a conversation about, I don't know if it was to go into our guidelines as an update, but I thought we talked about being able to submit projects that are leveraged. And then if the leverage doesn't happen, then the funding doesn't occur. So that was just one thing I thought would be potentially an applicable category for these going out of the normal framework. Because I think that you create a monster. So, what if VDOT comes twice a year with, oh, we have this money to leverage. Do you guys want to leverage this? What does that really do? So with that, of course, I think if it is something that's good for Goochland, then the opportunity should be, allowed and presented to them. But again, just thinking about the process and, the fairness and how we approach this equitably when another locality requests, we're going to have to take that in consideration. And then further back to the Fall Line Trail projects, I think, and somebody can correct me, but I thought we explicitly had a phase 1 and a phase 2 of prioritization, and that's where we first had the Fall Line segments, and we had those go through the approval list. I can't remember what we use as the objective process, but I did think that we used something to meet the intent of the law. So we may just want to take a look back at that before having to take them all through the cost benefit, which could be a benefit either way if we did that. And then just to Chessa's point, I agree that if the slot is available, that is good. But again, are we going to ignore deadlines? And if a locality, and again, I'm just saying all this stuff to say, if we are I would at least want to work towards having some out of the normal framework, at least guidelines to how we approach it, then to, backfill into, the things that we want to accomplish. But again, I think that if we could use the leverage project format with this, then that would probably be something that I could go along with.
Thank you, Darana. And yeah, I mean, that's a very valid point. We want to not allow this type of project request to get out of control. So I think that's certainly something we want to take into consideration once we get through this round with updates to the framework document, because we didn't really build this scenario in, but we also don't want to miss out on opportunities, as somebody pointed out. So I think there's a way to be able to accept these types of projects going forward, but on a manageable level. And certainly the authority has every right to say thank you, but no, if that's the choice. But the direction given to TAC from the authority was to take this back and consider it, because they did see benefits of being able to leverage other funding opportunities outside of the CVTA regional pot, which, as we all know, is a priority for the authority members. So this certainly fits that scenario. So I'll leave it at that. And actually, to go back to your other comment about the Fall Line Trail, so I'll have to defer to Chad and Miles as far as what measures we took into account for cost benefit analysis for the Fall Line. But I think worst case scenario, we just need to apply that process so that we meet the intent and the requirement of the law when we allocate the specific sections of the fall line, as well as the projects submitted by the rural localities that do not directly benefit from fall lines. As long as we check those boxes, I mean, basically the trail is competing against itself in that scenario. So, Barb, Dawn, if you're done, we can move to Barb, or did you have follow-up?
Yeah, sorry, I just had one follow-up. It was just specifically just when we talk about, when you said that this came from the authority as a priority, I just want to I still want to note that it has to be understood how things get in front of the authority. So if things are able to get to the authority as this is a good idea, then they may say, yes, it is. But again, do we not have any control of how that happens? Or is that what, is that politics at its best? Again, something coming before them and then directing us to take a look at it. I think that there's some, Chet and VDOT had to talk in order for that to go in front of them, in order for us to look at it. So I just want to make sure we're still clear on, how these priorities get before us. And, because, we can send people to put things before the board as well. And so again, I just want to be clear on how we address these things and how we, we see how they come about and how we deal with them. But thank you, Mr. Chair.
Duly noted, and I'll respond to that, and Chet can chime in. So yes, it's my understanding that Shane did reach out to Chet basically after the full authority agenda had already gone out, and well after the last TAC meeting. Chet reached out to me as TAC chair, and we scheduled a call between Chet, Shane, and myself to talk through the request and the process, and we're able. I concurred that it was worth honoring the request and present it to the full authority members, not for action, but whether they wanted to take it up for further consideration and direct back down to TAC at the next TAC meeting, which is this one. And so that was kind of the time. It was a timing issue because it's my understanding that the commissioner's offer for the funding was very last minute and on a very tight timeline. So that was kind of a decision that I made as TAC chair that yes, let's take it to the authority, because I think we would be not representing the best interest of the authority members to keep that information from them. So to your point, yes, we do need to put a process in place going forward. And again, I think the revisions to the framework document would be the appropriate forum for that, so that we can manage these requests going forward. So,
Mr. Chair, that mirrors my understanding of the process that we followed. I think one additional point to make is that we had assumed that a decision was necessary on whether to receive the funding at the March authority meeting until about 2 days beforehand, where we learned that it could be discussed and held off in any vote until April. So we did at that point highly recommend that TAC get a chance to take a look at this in more detail and provide a recommendation.
thank you. Does that answer your question, Dorona? All right, Barb, hand is raised.
So I do sort of feel like these are extenuating circumstances and agree with Joe's comment that we need to recognize that sometimes you can't get everything in a guidance document for every scenario that's going to come up, but it'll be something that we can keep on our parking lot list. We did all agree that we would go through the framework document and then, try to improve upon it after this round. So we can discuss that then. Will you be able to, Chet and Miles, score the project and add it to the scoring sheet so that when the CVTA meets in April, it's in there?
Yes, we should be able to do that. I mean, the project is in the long range plan, so we have a lot of the details already. But we need to work closely with Goochland County to make sure we have all the necessary information to do the scoring and ranking. Obviously, our discussion this afternoon is not going to include this project in the funding scenarios, so we'll have to adjust as needed. But we may actually be able to get that done before the Finance Committee on Wednesday.
I think it is in there.
Well, that's true. It is. It's not in the
Um,
scoring.
Yeah. And the $23 million number, is that VDOT's number? Or is VDOT gonna review that number and turn it into?
That's VDOT's number. We got it straight from the district right when they asked to put the project up to
Okay.
the CVTA to consider.
So we'll see it get inflated up to about 26 million, probably. And we're trying to leverage 14 total, so that brings it down to 12. I was just wondering if we really needed 8, maybe CVTA only needs to give them 6, but I'm so cheap.
So Barb, to that point, it sounds like the number that we've been given is maybe a little squishy, and the ask is a little bit squishy. It sounded like 8 was the max, as I understood it. And Chet, you're welcome to chime in, but I did hear Shane mentioned at some point during the conversation that the district could always apply some pre-scoping money if needed, if the number changes. So I would say if this is something that TAC supports, that we probably put a cap on it, so that on the amount, so that if it does go through the scenario that you're talking about and the estimate continues to increase, then the additional funding would need to come from elsewhere.
Yeah. Then I had one other thing, getting back to round 1 with the Fall Line Trail and the other rural projects. I kind of thought we already benefit cost ratioed that, but it's hard to keep up. But I would suggest that we just go back and benefit cost ratio the entire Fall Line Trail and those 4 rurals. Because then we've got that documented, rather than do it piecemeal as we develop the Fall Line Trail.
Mr. Chair, we're happy to do that and follow up with TAC and provide that information back out.
Okay, thank you. Austin and then Joe. Barb, were you done actually? Okay. So Austin, then Joe.
Yeah, just one point of clarification on the hard shoulder running lane. It's the northbound section of 288. So while the construction takes place in Powhatan and Goochland, it's mostly a Powhatan and Chesterfield benefit. We're happy to be involved in it, but I don't know if a lot of the coordination needs to go through us, because it's not, I guess it happens in Goochland. So I mean, we're happy to help in any way, but I know Powhatan and Chesterfield will probably want to chime in too.
For the record, I would also say that it benefits Henrico County. That was one of the reasons we don't not support the project.
I got you. Yeah, I was just referencing, I guess, the benefit listed in the STAR study.
Yeah, and no, thank you. And I will point out that, that was, I think, the consideration that has happened at several levels of discussion, is that it certainly does meet the qualifications as a regional project from the standpoint of
Right.
multiple localities, not just Goochland. Joe.
Yeah, so I apologize, but I'm just trying to keep up. So this project, is it listed in the 4 scenarios that were developed that are included in the agenda package? It is. Okay. And so how did it get listed in the 4 scenarios? Has it been, I thought it wasn't submitted as an application. It wasn't. So somebody explain that to me, please.
Miles, if you're ready.
Sure, I can jump in. So for the purposes of the discussions, since this item was originally assumed to be going to the CVTA for the decision in developing the drafts, we went ahead and included it. Obviously, things have changed, so now TAC has a chance to review this as well. And those scenarios will, of course, be revised again before and or after finance has their chance to look at it. So there, again, these are informational scenarios for discussion at this point for the TAC.
That helps greatly. If I can just have a brief follow up. So the CVTA previous that's shown, 1.4 million, where are those funds coming from?
Sure. So the approach, what we took on that, we looked at the previous funding that had already been set aside for the Fall Line Trail and for the rural projects. And then after reflecting the updates for FY22, that was what was left over in previous that was unattached to any other projects. Since this was 2 rural localities, we thought that that would be an appropriate use for it. So we went ahead and just used the balance of what was previous on the project. That was the assumption.
Okay, so it's just it's a scenario, but those aren't real dollars that have been allocated in the bank.
Correct. And that's why it was bolded as well, just so it stood out as a highlight that this is not something existing, that it was a new allocation that would be considered.
I'm just going to belabor, just so I make sure I got it. And the 6.5 is an additional possible allocation, but it's not, no commitment there. That's 8, and then whatever innovative funds plus. Okay, I got it.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. Other questions, comments? Okay, not hearing any, then this is a requested action. Would anybody like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to support this request. I think the view is that this is a regional benefit, and it's an opportunity to leverage our regional funds. And so I think it is, it makes a lot of sense.
All right, thank you, Joe. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Barb. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Chat, you're raising your hand. You're muted, Chat. You're still muted, Chat.
How long have I been doing this? The question, the discussion before it had moved towards possibly setting a cap or some type of a not to exceed amount. I don't know if that should be included in the motion or not.
That was my suggestion. I'll put that out there for the group to consider.
Yes, a cap is fine. I would, if you were in agreement, I guess it's the 8 million that's shown in the scenario would be the cap amount, seems to me.
All right, so are you willing to amend your motion to include the 8 million as a cap?
Yes.
Barb, do you want to keep your second with that?
Sure.
All right. So we have a motion and a second on a slightly revised action. Any discussion at this point? All right, hearing no more, Chad, are you clear on what the language of the motion is? All right, Janice, can you do a roll call vote, please?
Certainly. Ms. Amos,
No.
Ms. Smith,
Aye.
Ms. Walker.
I get to vote?
I'm sorry. Let me move on to Goochland. Mr. Coleman,
Aye.
Mr. Vadunez,
Aye.
Mayor Yor,
Aye.
Mr. Stoddard,
Aye.
Mr. Shardine,
Aye.
and Ms. Clark.
No.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call and the motion passes.
Okay, thank you, Janice.
Mhm.
All right, moving on to the next item, which is certainly related, regional project prioritization. Chet?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Starting on page 6 of the packet, there are 4 pages of summary scoring. I think everybody has seen this previously, but this is the outcomes of the eligibility scoring and ranking process divided by mode or by discipline, however you want to call it. So with the first page will be bike ped, second page is bridges, third page is highway, and fourth page is PE only. So the benefit, cost, and the category rank are all the way to the right in the yellow blocks. These are, it was noted they were subject to change with third-party review. That third-party review has taken place, and everyone has participated and informed staff of which direction to go in terms of the estimates. That is reflected in these scoring tables. So this is the latest information that we have in regard to how each project ranked at the end of the scoring process, and this is what was used to feed into the development of the draft funding scenarios. I would be, there are notes for each one regarding the ability to model some of the projects. For example, the bike ped. Some of the scores were impacted by the ability to model and to let's see. Some of the projects have been noted as already fully funded, and I think one thing to highlight on the bridge page, the second page 7, is that the Mayo Bridge projects were the only bridges that were submitted, and they used the draft SGR score. Highway projects, Forest Hill and Brook Road improvements, mobility and accessibility scored were based on bike ped improvements only. The highway improvements for these projects, based on the project, was not able to be modeled with the existing travel demand model. We hope to, in future years, develop a micro simulation model that we can use to more fine tune the impacts to specific corridors based on all types of different projects like these. And then the PE only, there were 2 notes, one on the Port of Virginia project based on volume changes on Deepwater Terminal and Commerce Road, and then impacts from the Broad Street streetscape to the transit model. So those, with those notes supplied, again, the category rank is presented all the way to the right for each of these scoring scenarios. Any questions on that? If not, I can go into the regional funding scenarios, which are directly resulting from these.
Anybody have any questions on the scoring? Nope, seeing none, keep rolling.
Okay, thank you very much. We do have a staff report on page 10 and 11 for TAC. So as background, we use the regional prioritization framework to act as the guide for all of the scoring, the objective analysis that's required under the legislation, and to develop the application process and eligibility. We had a third-party consulting firm brought on board to verify the estimates and make sure that everyone was satisfied with the estimates provided. Once that was finalized, we finalized the scoring and ranking, which we just reviewed, divided by category as is established in the framework. We then took the input that staff has received from both the TAC and the authority and developed 4 funding scenarios for consideration. And there's a couple different footnotes to provide there. 2 scenarios are based on a straight up pay-go model based on the expected revenues and the funding that's expected to be received from that. And then 2 scenarios are based on an initial bonding option using the guideline that was discussed at the authority, which was basically saying no more than 10% application to a bonding scenario. So we lined that up to see what the differences would be. So we also looked at 2 different timelines. 2 scenarios, 1 pay-go, 1 bonding, is based on a 4-year allocation window, which would be from 23 to 26. And that would basically bring us from the full 6 years from 21 through 26, using the 2 previous committed years already. And then the second grouping was look at a full new 6-year scenario, which was 23 to 28, and to see what the differences were there. Let's see, to start walking through, we had, as you can see, I think on page 12 is where the first scenario is. That is the pay-go based on 4 years of allocations. The rows that are shown grayed out are the rows that were not did not make it in to receive funding under this scenario. So the first 2 were the 2 Mayo Bridge crossings, and in discussions with VDOT, there is outside funding that has been identified that could be used to make these to bring these projects up. And for this scenario, we left the projects out because of the additional funding from another source that was identified. And Miles, jump in as needed to make sure I'm saying the right thing. The PE only, let's see. The Chesterfield Route 360 Wood Lake widening was PE only funded. The notes on the right-hand side. And I-64 widening in New Kent, because of the extent of the funding required, was left out of the pay-go 4 scenario. We do, for each one at the bottom of the scenario, show a reserve fund, setting aside 10% on a growing basis over the years, 10% to 25% in reserve for additional needs that are identified in future years, and show the reserve amount for each one, as well as what was allocated in each year from 23 to 26. Going into the next scenario on page 14, which was the pay-go 6-year from 23 to 28. Again, same kind of format in terms of what the scenario shows, and the reserves at the bottom. Again, going from 10% at this point to 35% in year 6, and the allocated funds for each year. The estimate, I didn't highlight that, and to the right of that bottom table on each scenario is an estimate of the available funds for the next round. So if you go for a 4-year scenario, I think the estimate here would be available for year 5. If you go with a 6-year scenario, the estimate would be available for year 7. The next scenario on page, I lost the page, on page 18, I think, is for a 4-year bond scenario, which would set aside, as we said, no more than 10%. So it changes things a little bit. It's able to get funding into I-64, which wasn't available in the pay-go options. we were able to show if it's a 10% bond, 96 million out of the available revenues would be from bond proceeds that could be allocated to start offsetting the cost of I-64 widening. And then in the last scenario, which was a 6-year bonding scenario, again, same type of process. We were able to show a little different spin on projects that were able to be included and the ones that were left aside, with the reserves again noted at the bottom of the table, and the estimate of available fundings for the next round. Mr. Chair, I ran through that quickly. Miles can help me out with any questions that members might have. Hopefully the format and the layout of the tables was somewhat self-explanatory, but we'd be happy to answer any questions at this point. I think actually before I do that, our hope is that the outcome of this meeting is that we don't end up with a recommendation from TAC, but that we are available to provide support for the Finance Committee on Wednesday, and that they would come up with a recommended scenario, with one scenario to move forward for public review and consideration over the next 15-day period before the authority meets on the 29th, to obviously hear the opinion of the public, hold the public hearing, and then move a recommended funding scenario forward for action.
And before we go to questions, Chet, just one additional clarification that might help the group is the scenario that you're hoping to get out of or you need to get out of the Finance Committee on Wednesday for publishing for the public hearing, has the ability to continue to be adjusted based on not only public input and comment, but based on discussions amongst the CVTA.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. We think it's a dynamic scenario up until the morning of the 29th.
And then the ask on the 29th would be for the full authority to take action on a funding scenario for approval.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Barb?
I've got a couple questions and they're all kind of unrelated. First, with the Mayo Bridge, you said VDOT's got a source, but there's still a balance. So what's the balance on those two?
That's a great question. I'm looking up the latest email I had. The VDOT funding plan is up to 75 million, cost to repair or replace in kind. So any additional amounts beyond that would need to be included here.
So that's not too bad.
No,
45
it's
and
pretty
35.
close.
And the notes say that the city is working on a plan for the balance. Is that right, Dorona?
No. We emailed VDOT ourselves as well, and we asked them, could we count that commitment that Chet is referring to as a commitment? And they said, until it's approved and all of this, then no, we can't count it as a commitment. And we've also, and so that's one of the reasons why we would like it still to be considered because it's just being, we're just assuming until, we take it off, it's not, it has funding, but then it doesn't get approved, and then it's still out of both pots of unavailable dollars. And then also, Chad, on that note, in your funding scenario notes, you say 15 million towards Mayo Bridge rehabilitation. So I wasn't sure what that meant, and then the gray meant when I came to the table. And that would be on the agenda, page 11.
I can jump in on that one, Chet. So that's Dorana, that's our fault, and I apologize for that. But the funding scenarios were revised late last week based on additional information that we learned. And these were what we prepared for the finance committee. So we wanted to make sure what TAC had was the same that we're going before the finance, which the main change was we hadn't prepared the four-year options. And then based on some discussions, there were some opportunities to move funding for like the Commerce Road projects into the committed Fall Line Trail pot, for example. So there are a few changes that we made. And as part
I
of
have a
that,
question about that as well.
so as part of all of that, we took out the Mayo Bridge based on the information from VDOT, so that this staff report no longer matches the tables that are in there. And so that's on us. I apologize for that.
So getting back, VDOT says they've got 75 million, but they won't let you use that in smart scale. They won't recognize that in smart scale so that you can get the remaining 5.
I am trying to find the email right now. Project budget. So it says the project budget at this point is 80 million. 13 million is committed, which is a 5 million earmark and 8 million annually repair RSCP. And I'm trying to find an email where I could see VDOT's language.
No one from VDOT's on the call.
Oh, here's Adam Mateo. The funding will not be locked in until after the program update in June. The following needs to be approved by the Commonwealth, but we're recommending 75 million from a combination of sources, IJA and SGR. Regarding funding availability, the way our projects work is the funding is open by the project phase. So funding is made available as required.
So it sounds to me like when VDOT approves the 6-year plan in July, you're going to know that that 75 is real. So as long as you submitted a pre-app for the Mayo Bridge, or north and south, however it was done, you'll be able to update your smart scale app to show committed funding. And if it's score great. Were they submitted?
Yep, I'm checking right now.
So while she's doing that, another question I had was, Chet, you said that you didn't really want a recommendation from us. But could we provide a recommendation to finance?
I think it's up to the TAC. I mean, when Todd and I were talking about the agenda, finance really needs to make the final recommendation in terms of the workflow, and because this is talking about a funding scenario. But if TAC had a priority order or something like that, where you wanted to say this is the one we're most comfortable with, I certainly think that would be helpful for finance committee. I think at a minimum, it'd be great if there were some folks from this meeting that would attend on Wednesday and be able to talk to some of the issues that we heard.
Yeah, Chad, I'll plan on being at finance committee. I assume I'm on the agenda for TAC update. So yeah, Barb, I very much strongly felt that any direction on funding needed to come from finance committee officially, but I think it's more than fair and probably good that the TAC does have some preferences that certainly can be communicated to the finance committee as a whole, as well as our individual members on the finance committee, so that they aren't flying blind on Wednesday. I just didn't want it to be a formal action coming out of TAC telling finance this is what you need to, this is what you should recommend.
Oh, no, I mean, I would say we would make a recommendation that we think this is the best idea and give that to finance. And yes, finance should be the one to give the recommendation to the authority.
Right.
Okay, one last question has to do with the 96 million in the bond scenarios. The way I understand it is the 10% would generate $96 million. And you guys assign that to 64 widening, but it could be assigned to anything. Or half of it could be assigned or whatever, but that's what you did here. Okay,
That's right.
all right. That's all I had.
Dorana, you have the floor again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'll start with that one since Barb has it fresh on my head. The 96 million. So one of the things I guess the staff note said that if we borrow the 96 million now, we'll pay back 134 million. And much to Barb's point about all 96 million going on 64, which isn't fully funded, and hence we may not be able to spend the money. It may be advantageous to fund only the PE of I-64 with CVTA money. If we were, and I think it could potentially have either scenario, bonding or non-bonding, that the PE can be funded for the 64. And it also will allow for VDOT to step up and find other funding for this interstate project. Is my comment one, just to piggyback on the 96 million going to a project that wouldn't start and we having to repay on something that isn't being utilized. And then the other part off of that led me to another point was, with this scenario right now, I think that we haven't gotten down to the details of programming it by project phase. And I think that then really may leave some questions, at least for me, on how we're best spending the money when we are, leaving some projects off. So I guess my first question would be, what impact do we think not programming by the project phase does it have on this funding scenario, any, if at all? Would be one of my questions. And then so to Barb's other question about the Mayo Bridge, no, it was not submitted as a smart scale project. And so it would look like that at minimum, we would request that, request 5 million from the CVTA with the application that was submitted for regional funding. And there was another project, specifically Miles. Well, two things with the Fall Line Trail. With one of our projects, it seems that it says that funding was already identified, and we were seeking additional CVTA money, not the amount that's allocated in the Fall Line, in the regional breakdown. So that also led to another question, which was, what exactly is the balance to complete for the Fall Line? What projects does that consist of? Because for the Commerce Road, there were sections of it that should be included in that balance. So we don't know if it was double shown or what exactly was being done there. And then for the one under that, the Manchester over the James River, we were asking for CVTA funds there for non-Fall Line related projects. And so it wasn't that this was all Fall Line Trail. What the Fall Line Trail, that's included in the Fall Line Trail cost, this project had other elements that were not, and that was what the ask was, for clarification on not providing any new CVTA regional funds on that particular line item.
Rona, can I jump in and answer some of these before? Okay.
I'll stop. Okay.
So I'll work backwards. In terms of the fall line trail and how that worked, this essentially what we did was we said there's already $104 million set aside for the fall line trail. We've identified the 2 projects plus the design work that the city's undertaking right now. So those we know we're going to have commitments for, but there's still going to be additional funds available. So the approach was to take from that 104 million that's already been previously set aside and put that toward your 2 Commerce Road projects because they are fall line related. Because the fall line's on there, the 8 million and the 3 million that were requested for those 2 projects could come from that bigger fall line pot. So that was the approach that we included in here. So if you look, there's
We're asking for 23, 28 money, not re-give us 21 and 22 money.
It's not re-giving, this is new money that's not already committed to those projects. So there's no commitment to those projects from the fall line pot already. So this is the commitment that we have from the CVTA.
No commitment. Okay, you're gonna have to probably clarify offline.
Sure. So the first commerce phase 1 is smart scale funded. And I think there's 3 million in local match dollars, which is what the CVTA funding is replacing effectively. And so what this did was it replaced the previous local dollars with the previous CVTA dollars, pulling from that fall line trail pot. That's the approach that staff took on that. And then the same idea applied with the new commerce phase 2. There was an 8 million request, which I think is for smart scale leveraging. So then we pulled that from that same fall line trail pot, but it has to be previous money because we've only used FY21 and FY22 for that fall line trail commitment.
I think I understand what you're saying. So you did replace the 3 million that was local with regional CVTA dollars.
Correct. So that's in all of the scenarios now. There's that's again, same thing as Joe's earlier question. The bolded previous line is because this is a new amount of previous money. It's not an existing commitment. It was something new that we were adding on. So we're trying to make that one stand out a little bit more.
Okay.
To address the question about Manchester, Manchester was the bottom scoring bike ped project. So in some scenarios, it was not able to be funded. So that's why it drops out. It's not because it was fall line related. It was just because it was the bottom scoring of the bike ped projects. And then I guess the first bigger question of how this whole approach and what staff did in developing these 4 draft scenarios. For the 6-year program options, essentially what we did was we broke down the splits of how much was requested for each project type, and then got the soft or hard cap based on the guidelines on how much money could be allocated towards that type of project. And we worked our way down the list. We started with the smaller ones, the PE only and the bike ped, and then we worked our way through the highway projects at the end. So that was the general approach, working our way down the list. And we did match it to schedule. So there's actually, you don't have it because we cleaned it up for the PDF, but there's 6 or 7 additional columns that show PE start, right away start, cost by phase. So this is matched to project schedules and project phase estimates in the 6-year plans. In the 4-year plans, that's just not possible. If we're going to make the funding amount match the requests, we can't fit it with the schedule. So it is front loaded. And we tried to note on there in particular, the ones that were front loaded, where you have money before the phase actually needs it. And a lot of those were applications where the funding would go as a smart scale leveraging. So it made sense to still front load it because assuming it gets funded through smart scale, the funding will match up, smart scale fill in the gaps and it'll match the schedule. So that was something we tried to address. And then I guess that's where you start seeing like the Manchester project dropping off, is because we were looking at the percentages that could go to each mode and then the rankings within each of those modes. So it was a moving target. The majority obviously went to highway because it was about 90% of the requested funding was for highway projects. So when it came down to it in the scenarios where we didn't have enough for everything, it was usually the PE or the bike ped projects that were coming out first, and then some of the highways were partially funded.
And then my last question, thank you for that explanation, Miles. Is it in our guidelines? I just had a question about the reserves. They seem to kind of exponentially grow pretty high. Are we all in agreement, or is it in our guidelines that that's the rate of the reserves that we're going to hold?
Yes, those are specifically in the guidelines. So we tried to just match exactly and not touch the reserves. So we tried to keep those intact.
I'll be happy to weigh in on that at some point.
That's over now. I have a couple of questions afterwards, but I can wait till others speak.
Okay, thank you, Dorana. Barb, you had your hand raised and you'd also put something in the chat.
Yeah, that fall line stuff. 104 from CVTA, right, and 40-ish from CTB. We're about short 100 million still.
104.5 from CVTA, CTB was 42, I think. And then we have pending unknown amount coming from, hopefully coming from the state budget. One version, I think, still has 90 million in for trails across the state. I don't know what that breakout for fall line is. That's still a moving target, but there will likely be some additional funding coming in from the state.
Yeah, but we're generally speaking about 100 million short, right?
Probably
Until we hear from the state.
Until we hear from the state, and also keep in mind that there's a number of other funding applications out there pending, and including the next round of Smart Scale that will cover some sections. So I don't know that we're really going to know what that hard delta is for anytime soon. Plus, as the sections get designed, cost estimates continuing to change. So.
Getting back to the 64 project, the 96 million would go to the $300 million project, $400 million project? Or
That's right.
are you talking about the little section? The little section is not 96 million, right?
Or so it would go towards that total project, but I think just like fall line, the TAC and the CVTA ultimately could recommend applying it specifically to this smart scale application for the next phase. For example, so that next project I think is 138 million is the base estimate. So that would go a long way towards buying down that next section. But at the $400 million, obviously it still leaves a lot on the table.
So the smart scale project's $138 million.
Yes, I think that's the last estimate we had.
And Miles, are you going to be attending the finance committee meeting to explain stuff?
Yes, I'll be there as well.
Oh, good. Okay. Thanks. That's all I had.
Other
Mr. Chair, just one other thing. You were mentioning the bike ped budget. We also, we're waiting to see what's in the budget for I-64, if there's anything there on the state level.
Yes, I know there's been promised conversations that I'm not aware have occurred from the state on I-64 widening. So we knew what the preference of the previous administration was, but we have not heard from the current administration on what approach they support and what amount of money they're willing to bring to the table. So I would offer that it's perhaps a little premature for the CVTA to be playing our hand when we don't know what their hand is, in terms of what the real ask is, what the real need is. Because one of the scenarios the previous administration was looking at included tolling. So we don't know if this administration supports tolling, and if there's even vendors interested in a public-private partnership. So there's a lot of questions out there that we at Henrico County don't know the answer to. So if anybody else on here knows answers, it would be very helpful and informative to the group. You can read between the lines on that if you would like. Are there questions? Liz, I saw you joined us. At one point you had your hand raised. Did you just want to say hi or did you have something to add?
Well, I was going to add, there was additional, and hi, sorry, that no one was here from VDOT until now. Apologize for that. There is also the $2 million down in the Tri-Cities area toward the Fall Line Trail. You guys were talking about the money. Other than that, I just wanted to say hi. And I understood there were some questions of VDOT. Not sure I can answer them, but I can try and or convey them to someone who can.
Yes, thank you for pointing out the $2 million in earmark from Tri-Cities. So that comes off the total need as well. So thank you. Any questions for Liz on behalf of VDOT?
Mr. Chair, there were, just circling back to the discussion earlier about Mayo Bridge. I didn't know if VDOT was able to provide any more information about that in terms of the funding that had been identified outside of our circle and what we might be able to talk about as we look at funding scenarios.
I don't think there's been an answer, but I'll follow up with Mark and find out.
So Liz, is the bulk of the funding that VDOT's talking about SGR funding?
I think so, but I've not really been that closely involved in it, so don't take that to the bank.
Dorana, you were shaking your head. Have they clarified that?
Yeah, they haven't clarified, but
Right.
out of the 75 million, I don't think, I think at least, I don't know either.
I'm looking through some emails right now, see if I can find it, but
Because we are aware that there was an additional allocation that's being directed towards the SGR program for this round, so that might be a possibility. And then I guess the follow-up question for Liz is, do you know what the timeline for the SGR draft recommendations are? And I assume that's all going to fold into the secure plan for adoption in June.
yeah, which means they should have the draft recommendations already or very soon because the draft SIP has been created. So I'll follow up on that as well.
And just also for clarification, Liz, SGR is allocated by construction district.
Correct.
So if the district is making a recommendation of X amount of SGR dollars going to a project, then even if it's in draft form, it's a fairly good chance that.
Yeah, there would have to be something pretty significant for them to change it.
Thank you. Other questions for Liz or the group?
Mr. Chair. Sorry,
Yes, Dorana.
So, I mean, my recommendation for the Mayo Bridge, as I previously stated, would be to, at the minimum, probably put $2.5 million on each of those lines with the remaining balance. And then that way it doesn't gray the project out completely. While I know that will require adjustments, I don't want, and again, I know it's the discretion of the board anyway, they may not even want to fund any bridge project. But it was scored and ranked, and there is still a balance outside of what VDOT will have. And so just not to put us in a pickle where it's just excluded all the way and not on the funding scenario as we move forward to approval and presentation to the full authority. Yeah, and then other than that, I guess, I mean, we can try to figure out how that happens. Or if that can happen. And then my other question was for the 64, in both the pay-go and the bond, it does, 64 widening does receive funding.
I'll defer to Chet and Miles on that.
Not with the Vega.
In PAYGO 4, I think it's not funded. In PAYGO 6, I think there's a small amount, like 20 million or something out of the total request.
23,
So
yeah.
it's not a small amount in total, but a much smaller portion of the overall project cost.
Mhm. And that was, I think it's important to have something. And then the other question, the only other point I would make, because I don't know if we're gonna get to the point for this group, are we gonna like give, a recommendation on, I know Todd, you were saying we don't do it, but I don't know exactly what we're gonna be charged with on even, or from the notes when we talk about the pay-go and the bond. I think it's important to realize that with the bond and the 96 million, it's really, and even the pay-go, it's gonna exclude any really large projects, if we go with the bond, to happen and to be considered by the authority if we lock in on one project, this go round. Because it'll be, unless they raise the debt limit that they have above the 10%. So, because we're gonna spend the 10% if we go with the bonding scenario. And then when other larger projects come about, specifically the one Richmond likes, is the north-south, will there be dollars, in the program to support that to happen? So I know it seems that Richmond at least is siding with the pay-go 6. But again, I don't know what we're sending over to the finance committee, if anything. If it's at least, do we want 4 over 6? That may be a safe way to go, or even more detailed than that.
Thank you, Dorona. Was there a question in there, or was that a statement? I think you
Just
have.
as we're moving us forward on, is this what we're gonna do with this? I'm like, I have other meetings, but what are we? I don't even know on the agenda what it says. Where is it? An action, information? Are we? I know Barb was talking about. Are we recommending? What are we doing with this stuff?
It is an information item at this point, but the discussion earlier was to perhaps go to finance on Wednesday with maybe some context on the discussion that happened at the TAC and what the TAC kind of concluded as far as maybe what's a good approach without a formal, this is what we think finance should do. If I am interpreting the previous discussion correctly. Joe and then Barb.
I want to circle back to something that Dorona said in her last comment at the beginning, and something that had occurred to me while I was trying to digest all of this. Our guidance document for allocating these funds was to assign the funds roughly proportional to the request by project type. So if 5% of the total request were for bike ped, then the allocations would correspond more or less. I wouldn't expect it to be perfect math. So to that point, the Mayo being the only 2 bridge projects and there being no funding assigned doesn't seem to align with that, but maybe there's a good reason for that. So I allow somebody to answer. Explain that.
Sure. I mean, I can jump in. And this is the assumption that we made in developing this scenario was based on the information shared by VDOT that they did not expect the additional 15 million would be needed to finish Mayo Bridge. So based on the information that we had, the understanding was that the funding was not needed to complete that project.
Okay, but then subsequent to that, it's found out we're about 10 million short, or 5 million short. So, I think the context, Todd, for, from this group to finance would be some type of I know there's just 2 days, but, the information seems to be changing daily. And that's not a criticism. It's just we're getting updated information. And so you have to operate on the fly. And I would recommend that we make that adjustment to close that balance in the draft that goes to finance, or at least in the discussion to finance.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And it's a very good point that there are a lot of moving parts and pieces. So if I understand, is it 5 million total ask for both sections of Mayo?
Yes.
Barb?
Yeah, I think Dorona suggested 2.5 be assigned to each of those projects,
Gotcha.
which makes sense. So going back to another comment Dorona made was about the bonding capacity. I think a lot of people this round were pretty conservative with their ask. We didn't know how big the sandbox was that we were playing in. So I was worried that if we were to do the 10% bonding scenario, that we wouldn't be able to go after another bond anytime soon, which isn't something, because we do have bigger projects still to get done. But someone's clarified that for me. And I know that our financial advisor folks gave a scenario that was a lot bigger. So I think we're going to have capacity to issue a bond, and we could do that right on the heels of this one next year. So I think as long as we're not locking up all of our money so that we don't have enough to pay the debt service on a second bond, I'm good. I just don't want to, I just don't want to over program and not have reserves that we can use for debt service in the future.
And
That's it.
Thank you. That's a good point, Barb. And this is something that I think, at least in my mind, I don't have good clarity on what we need to leave in reserve. I know what we have in the guidelines, and I totally understand why we have an increasing percentage for every year, because just as with RSTP and CMAC, and I think this is kind of modeled after that to a degree, is there's always project overruns and other things that come up. For the most part, this list is either projects that haven't started yet or leveraging smart scale. So while we're hopeful that as many of the projects that are on the list that are looking to leverage smart scale or other funding sources will be funded, the odds of that are not great. So I think by default, we're going to have a lot of reserve money over the next couple of years anyway, even if we don't carve out large amounts. So I would offer to the group that maybe we work our way up to larger reserves in the outer years, and maybe the near years we don't need reserve, or at least not much reserve. I will also offer that we're sitting on, at least a month ago, we're sitting on 72 million in cash in the regional pot that hasn't been spent, that was dedicated to fall line. That number has probably grown by probably over 80 million now. Chad, I don't know if you have the number. That is money that's not being used until we get it programmed, the fall line, which most of us know that's going to be several years. So we have, by default, we have a very, very, very large reserve we're sitting on now. So I will stop there for the moment. Barb?
I agree that there is money that isn't being actively used, but really that should be in a programming document laid out. So it doesn't need to be 17 million coming out of 20 and 21.
Mhm.
As long as we've got 17 million plus inflation programmed as we need it in developing the fall line trail. And that is definitely a next step for the working group, fall line trail working group. And it could be, we're trying to figure out, we've got phase 1 and phase 2, and we need to figure out what's going to come up next with the money that we do have. Even before we know that answer, we could just put it in a programming document in the right years. So that, maybe what we thought we were going to have in 25, we know that's going to be the big construction year in Fall Line Trail. If we can make our decisions, we can utilize some of the 17 that's just sitting there. But until we really get it programmed, it is just kind of sitting there not doing stuff.
Agreed.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
yeah, just on that comment with the reserves, did we kind of define, because I too understood that the reserves work like for overages, much like the CMAQ and RSTP, but is that pocket that we're showing there also going to be kind of considered for the debt service that Barb spoke about? Are we looking at it in that lens? The question.
That's a very good question. I have the same question, and Chet and Miles, I don't know if y'all have that answer.
Sure. We actually put the debt service as a separate line item in the allocations plans for the 2 bond scenarios. So our approach was essentially to take the debt service, the 6.72 million off the top, and then we took the reserve amounts from whatever was left, essentially saying we're not even counting that money in what's available for the year because that's off the top, and then working the scenarios based on what was left after taking the debt service. So the reserves were not intended to handle the debt service. We treated them as 2 separate items. So again, with the intent that the reserves are there for project overruns or anything that comes up.
Thank you. So in the scenario where it's pay-go, then there's really no set aside for bonding needed. Like even if you plan on out year bonding.
Yeah, but maybe we reflect in the bond scenario, the bond 6. And I don't know if it would cause for the guidelines to be updated, but maybe shifting some of those higher years and the out years over to the debt service line. Like in 28, we have 22, almost 23 million, and still keeping the debt service. Because if we look at the scenario with the financial advisors described, I think they say we can go up to like 50%. Yeah, we're at 10, so that potentially means we could bond 3-4 more times if we stayed at that level. But of course, we know that debt service would go up. And so I think it's worth at least a conversation. And it may be that they are happy with 10% for until 2029. I don't know.
Todd,
Yes, Barb.
so if an option we could entertain would be, we've got debt service as a line item in those 2 scenarios. But if we did think that we've got some future additional bonding opportunities, we could have another line item that says future bonding. And maybe there's nothing in the early years and it's bigger in the outer years. And that could be a line item that's in all the scenarios, pay-go and the bonding, so that we've got money set aside for the debt service if people decide to go that way.
So maybe in years 3 and 4 or something like that. And beyond. Yeah, I like that idea. I would want to defer to the financial advisors to give us guidance on that. And I don't think those conversations have really happened in any detail. I know the finance working group hasn't really dug into that yet. So I think that's part of the reason why, it's out of tax purview to be making those decisions, because that information hasn't been given back down to us. I think these are good questions that we need to push up to them for certain.
Yeah, I agree, Mr. Chair. And I would just say that even maybe when we're presenting the bonding scenario, that we make this statement that it doesn't have to occur in 23. And then maybe Chatham Isles, you want to be prepared to say what that funding scenario looks like if it's not in 23. Do you know what I mean? Like if they would be ready for the 10% in 24, like what does that look like? And I wouldn't go much past that, but, or what is, I think it could be a general statement on what you would, so if basically, if it's not done in 23, the difference is 64 getting 96 million or 20 million. I mean, I don't think it's as simple as that, maybe other few bullets, but I mean, that might be the gist of, telling them what pay-go happening in 23 versus an out year. I mean, bonding, sorry.
So, and I'll add on to something Barb said earlier, that basically, I guess with the exception of the I-64 widening, generally the project asks are relatively small this time around. I think just having conversations with others on this group, we know there's a lot of bigger projects in the horizon amongst the many of the localities. So it's probably a conservatively good approach to keep as much powder dry as we would like. I think that's kind of where we are as a county. So I think, and I know there's conversations amongst the administrators kind of along these same lines of what everybody's thinking now that we kind of see the project list and the amounts and so forth, knowing that there's a lot more we're collectively going to want as a region. So I would venture to say there may be a 4-year funding scenario that's pay-go that will get the bulk of everything funded on here if we're not if we relax our requirements for the reserve, at least for the first year or two, like our discussion was saying, understanding the intent of the reserve and knowing that's important going forward. But maybe we're in a situation that it's not needed now, that if we can get the bulk of the projects on this list, knowing there's still moving parts and pieces funded, then maybe that's something that's amenable to the group, with the 64 conversations still to come. So welcome feedback on that.
So are you saying you're leaning towards the pay-go 4?
Yes, based on our conversations here at the county, we think as long as everybody's happy with most of, if not all, their projects being funded on a 4-year pay-go, with the caveat that we're not holding reserve for years 1 and 2. So that would be 23 and 24. And if you look at a scenario where you get to a 10% reserve for years 3 and 4, so 1 and 2, 0, 3 and 4, 10%, that pretty much, depending on, and I'm not knowing where the Mayo Bridge was landing in terms of what that ask was, just I ran a dry run scenario Friday night. And if you pull out 64, which was the lowest ranking project on the highways, understanding that that's a commitment that we're likely going to have to make at some point, but we don't know the details of it yet. What the state's bringing to the table versus what the ask is, what the funding approach is, then we can fund most everything else on here. Probably need to have some discussion with Nora and the town of Ashland on maybe a phased approach to the Vaughn Street bridge. But, and I'll be glad to start that conversation, Nora, offline, if that would help. So I haven't shared anything formally with this group beyond what I'm saying, because we had to run it. We had to vet it internally. Like I said, that was a Friday thing, but I know that our administration is kind of looking at that scenario and wanted to kind of carry that conversation with the other administrators. So that's, I think, where that conversation is starting. Where it'll be by Wednesday, I don't know, but I'll put that out there.
Well, Todd, I mean, I think with the 2.5 consideration for Richmond for the Mayo Bridge and the additional dollars that'll come with lifting the reserves for 23 and 24 and lowering them for 25 and 26, it does allow for a bigger program for future applications. One of the things it does for Richmond, it does, I think it may, I have to look at it directly, but it may reduce or not help some of our leveraging for smart scale. I have to look specifically at that number, but it's not a bad approach, but let me keep thinking about it.
And that was kind of the scenario that we were looking at. That was assuming that the fall-in segments in the city would do as Miles discussed earlier, and that would come out of the previous allocations for fall line.
Yeah, my folks still have some issues with that because they were asking for additional dollars. Now that you bring that up, let me see what I have on that.
Duran, I think I can jump in and clarify because I've
Oh yeah,
just
did you
reviewed the
get that
application.
email?
Yes, I did.
Like, there you go.
So the city, the ask in the application was $8 million, but they're looking for something in the 23 to 20, wherever we end with the program. The thought being that the city is trying to leverage essentially the city raised funds that were committed to Fall Line Trail as a previous commitment for the Commerce Road 2 project. I don't think that's been decided by the working group or the full CVTA yet, so I'm not sure those funds can count as committed for smart scale or any other purposes, but that is the intent of the ask. So they were trying to take the 19 from the already committed and then get the 8 in the new program as opposed to in those previous years. So hopefully that made sense.
It didn't make sense to me, but maybe it does to Dorana. Barb, you have your hand raised.
Something else to consider is a lot of the requests are for leveraging, which may or may not come to fruition. So Todd, you were suggesting reducing the reserve amount on the bottom, which
Yeah.
had me concerned. for a moment until I remembered that, that there's a good chance that people have asked for leveraging and they're not going to get the smart scale money. So that money will eventually get back into the pot. With that in mind, PAYGO 4, we're missing a project that we requested leveraging for, that's been submitted for smart scale. I'd be curious to know whether that one can get in without impacting the reserve amount too terribly bad.
Which project is that?
360 Wood Lake to Otterdale.
The scenario that we ran would include that, yes. You're muted, Barb.
Can you send that scenario out? Oh,
Yeah.
you needed to vet it through people, right? Is that what you said?
I think it's been vetted. I mean, I vetted it with our management very, very into last week, so I can send it out. Keeping in mind, there's numbers still changing as we sit here and talk, so. Other questions, comments?
It seems like people are leaning towards PAYGO.
PAYGO for 4-year or 6-year? 4-year if everybody either gets everything they want or most of what they want, with the understanding you can come back for more later, with the exception of 64, which is a bigger conversation that needs to happen when VDOT's ready to have the conversation.
Mhm.
So what I'm hearing then is at finance on Wednesday, we can tentatively say that conditioned on reducing the reserve amounts to possibly 0 for years 23 and 24, and a lesser reserve amount than what's in the guidelines for years 3 and 4 to set us up for bonding in a couple of years, that there seems to be a comfort level at TAC to at least further consideration of a 4-year PAYGO with details to be worked out. But it appears that most every project on there will get some funding, with the exception of 64, which would be contingent on further conversations. I'm not trying to put words in anybody's mouth. I'll be sitting at the table, so I need words.
I am a little concerned about 64. 20 million on a 138 million is not going to push it to get smart scale money, but the 96 I think would.
Yeah, I mean, as I recall, it scored very, 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 very poorly on smart scale last round with 0 leveraging. So I don't know what the math is to get it to score well enough to be funded, but I will also offer, and Liz is still on here, that we know VDOT potentially has access to other funding sources for interstate improvements, and those conversations need to happen. We've asked for that conversation to happen with leadership, and it, to my knowledge,
Yes.
it hasn't happened. So
Yeah, and I agree with that too. There's the interstate pot that never seems to come up with 64 discussions.
right. So certainly, I think it's going to be an expectation that the region does put some money towards 64 widening, just as I think the expectation is Hampton Roads will as well. But we don't know how much. We don't know what other funding is available. We don't even know the true cost of the project, because there's this scenarios with tolling, without tolling. So I think over the next year or two, those conversations will hopefully happen, and we'll be in a better place to understand how much the region needs to put towards the project, whether that be through smart scale or whatever. So that's my understanding of where we are with that. Liz, I don't know if you have any additional information related to 64 widening.
Other than the conversations are starting to happen. But there's been no decisions made. And as I understand it, basically what you guys said is correct. They're looking, I know that we were encouraged to encourage you guys to apply for it because of the, trying to remember the wording that was used, but basically that if you guys had some money to put towards it, it would be more appetizing for the feds to go ahead and pay for the rest. But nothing solid, nothing in writing. And those discussions are pretty preliminary at this point.
So we don't know what that number is, and do we know a schedule? I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is, could we have that conversation with next year's CVTA regional discussion?
Right. Okay. I can get back to you on that and find out about a schedule, a timeline.
I think that would be helpful to the authority for definite.
Yeah.
Other questions, comments?
Just one quick question. Oh, sorry, Barb. So with the pay go for, would we be putting any on 64? Any dollars?
Not this round, no,
Okay.
because we don't know what those dollars are. I mean, we could pick a number, but then we don't know what the number needs to be.
And so that's why, along with other reasons though, just putting the 20 million or so with the PAYGO 6 may not really be what's needed right now to help them anyway.
Right, and we don't know their schedule. I mean, we don't know when the federal dollars are available. So if we put 20 million or whatever number on it now, that money could easily sit there for 2 or 3 years. So before anybody can spend it, until we know the schedule and the funding plan on the VDOT side, it's just too many unknowns, in my opinion. Which is kind of goes back to the supporting the idea of keep as much of our powder dry now as we can, knowing that there's going to be a bigger ask and bigger needs over the next couple of years. Barb?
Yeah, I think adding a line item like we discussed for future debt service and just holding that money back on a pay-go scenario would be a good way to make sure we don't over-program.
Duly noted. So, Chat, does this give you a level of comfort going to finance on Wednesday?
I think so. I mean, I kind of have an idea what tax general consensus is. There's a number of questions that still need to be answered, but I think we have time between now and the 29th. I think I-64 is going to be a discussion, and it's going to be important to the elected officials to put that on the table. So I think we just need to be prepared for that. But yeah, I mean, I think for Wednesday's meeting of the Finance Committee, I think staff, we know what we need to do to add some additional options and consider some of the things that you all suggested. We will also follow up with the financial advisors and see if they have any additional suggestions that we might want to have in our quiver for discussion on Wednesday, or obviously for the full authority. But yeah, I think other than that, we're in good shape.
Okay, good. Any other questions or comments on this item? We've been on it for a while, but it's kind of important. We've lost a few people along the way, it appears, based on the chat. So I won't take it personal. All right, then that moves us to item 8, FY23 final allocation plans update. Chat.
We haven't gotten any additional ones. I'm assuming that everyone who is going to submit allocation plans for FY23 has done so. If you haven't, then please get them submitted as soon as possible. I know that I believe at least one jurisdiction was waiting to have their budget done, and I'm sure they'll submit the allocation plan now, but otherwise staff is gonna start packaging that up for consideration by the authority at its May meeting, I think.
Very good. Any questions or comments on that item? All right, hearing none, moving on to item 9, fall line working group update. So I guess at the last authority meeting, the full authority took action. Gosh, it's been a while, so I think there was a total of 4 different items on there, including the packaging of the 2 VDOT, either design bid build or design build packages, 1 north, 1 south, authorization to develop an agreement and with the CVTA and go to the CTB, which at last update I had was going to be pushed out a month. Liz, I don't know if you have any update on that.
Yeah, we're shooting for June now for the CTB instead of May.
Very good. And then third item was for allocation to the city to do the preliminary impact analysis and operational analysis for this section of the realignment in the city. And Dorona had provided a cost estimate for that, which the number escapes me at the moment. But the authority didn't actually take action on specific numbers for either the VDOT sections or the city sections. So basically that was left to be filled in. And then the last item was to direct the fall line working group to basically develop a spending plan and for the remaining segments, basically help, as we discussed earlier, figure out what the delta is on allocations versus cost estimates, which continues to evolve. So I guess we'll pick that up at the next fall line working group meeting. And my guess is that will kind of spill over into May once we have the state budget numbers, and hopefully June will be closer to having a better picture on that. Chet, did I miss anything? All right. Unless there's any questions or comments on fall line, we can move forward to item 10, CVTA TAC member comments. Anybody have anything left to say? Wore everybody out. All right. Next meeting will be May 9th, which will be following the full authority meeting on the 29th. So stay tuned. That one should be fun-filled. Anything else to add, Chet?
Nope, I think we covered it.
Great. All right. Thank you for everybody's time. We will adjourn and we'll talk soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.